Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Curot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1987 movie titled Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Now, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a comedy that runs for an hour and 33 minutes long. It is written, directed, and produced by John Hughes. The score was done by Ira Newborn and Anthony Marinelli. The cinematography by Donald Peterman, and the editing by Paul Hirsch. And of course the stars of the movie are Steve Martin, John Candy, plus also some supporting roles from Michael McKean, who of course is best known for his role as Lenny from Laverne and Shirley, you know, the duo of Lenny and Squiggy. And he also played the role of David St. Hubbins of the pseudo-rock group Spinal Tap. We also have some cameo appearances from Kevin Bacon, Ben Stein, Edie McClurg, who had a very memorable scene in this movie, and William Windom. Now, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is definitely a solid road movie that stars comedy legends Steve Martin and the late John Candy in this exciting road movie about a stuffy marketing executive named Neil Page who meets up with a talkative, cheery shower curtain ring salesman named Dal Griffith, played by John Candy, whose lives are definitely contrary to the other. The duo embark on a series of misadventures as Neil wants to do everything he can to get to his humble abode in Chicago from New York City to be with the kin for Thanksgiving, only to wind up in a semi-condemned hotel in Wichita, Kansas, and lying on a beer-drenched mattress. The pairing of Martin and Candy, let's just say, were perfectly cast, as both possess a comedic charm that complements each other rather than trying to upstage one another. Even though they handle the physical scenes quite subliminally, they also progressively get to understand each other a lot more better, which this comedy stands out from the other ones, being that the character development plays an equally pivotal role rather than just the physical drive of each character. In other words, this may be a comedy, but this is a comedy that actually has some teeth to go with it. It doesn't rely on... Well, there is, of course, quite a bit of profanity, but I think most of it is just in one scene in less than 3 minutes where, you know, Steve Martin is at a car rental place and he keeps dropping the F-bomb about 18 consecutive times, maybe 19, I wasn't really keeping count. But I think that was probably where most of the profanity comes from. There are a few other shits and fucks in scattered places, but it's not all entirely, you know, offensive. I mean, unless you have virgin ears, but that's really like where most of the adult content seems to technically come from. Let's see here. Under the direction and penmanship of John Hughes, who has, at the time, was directing, you know, Brat Pack films like The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles. Well, he kind of stepped aside from this domain to direct, write, and produce this movie. But there is one thing that still remains the same, is that the characters have multi-layered arcs, and it's not just lazily dependent on cliché. And the movie here kind of like helps mold the way an adolescent theme film should be done in the Hollywood industry. I mean, this is not, you know, one-dimensional characters here. We see, you know, a couple of characters who you really take deep sympathy for. Sure, at first you may probably think that Steve Martin's character, Neil Page, maybe comes across as being a bit unlikable, being the fact that, you know, he's slick, he's arrogant. He may sometimes come across as being borderline rude, especially with the car rental agent, or the time he lashed out and started to verbally bully Dell, insulting him, saying that I'd rather be more entertained at an insurance seminar than having to put up listening to your horse crap. And then Dell eventually retaliates back without, insulting him back, but by saying him, if you want to hurt my feelings, go right ahead. If it's to, get it out of your system, by all means. But there's one thing that you're not going to do. You can insult me all you want, but I'm not going to change, because I like me. My wife likes me. My customers like me, because I'm the real deal. And I could be a cynical asshole just like you, but I'm not like that. I don't like to hurt people's feelings. That speech in itself is quite inspirational. So there is, a little bit of coming of age going into this movie. And that, coming of age stories do not necessarily have to evolve around teens or 20-somethings, but they could actually evolve around middle-aged guys. 30, 40-year-olds can also experience coming of age. And Neil and Dell kind of learn from their ways, like Neil has to learn to ease off with his self-absorbed ways, and Dell also has to learn to sometimes back off a bit. I mean, both of them are well-meaning individuals, but they also have to learn a bit of life's lessons. And that's always something that kind of happens in a lot of John Hughes movies. There will be some sort of serious undercurrents involving his characters, no matter how extravagant the situation each character encounters. Sure, this is not a teen movie with conflicts and tribulations of making it big in the real world. I mean, come on. We have Neil and Dell drenched in their clothes with beer on a soaked-up mattress at the Braden Hotel in Wichita, Kansas. Sure, this is a comedy for laughs only, but in the end, there is also a bit of a tender sweetness behind it all, and once the laughs die down, it will likely generate your heartstrings with a caressing feeling inside of you. The end of the movie really, really starts to, become a little bit more drama than comedy. When Neil arrives at the train station and notices Dell just sitting there, Dell eventually comes on and confesses to Neil that my wife passed away 8 years ago, and technically I don't really have a home. So in other words, he just sort of lives off of sleeping in motels and just travels all the time. He doesn't really have a place to call home. So then Neil gracefully invites him home to have Thanksgiving with the family as a token of his appreciation. And just that alone really would bring a tear to your eyes. But other than that, this movie is mostly played for laughs, technically. I mean, there is no real major dramatic undercurrents like movies like The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles, but there is a lot of great development, especially from the characters of Neil and Dell, played by Steve Martin and John Candy. And of course, you're also, if you want, there's also some great cameo appearances from some great notables, like Michael McKean, who played Lenny from Laverne and Shirley as a state trooper. We have Kevin Bacon, who's a taxi driver. Edie McClurg, who's been in movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, another John Hughes movie. She's a car rental agent. And we have Ben Stein, who's, Win Ben Stein's Money. He's also in this movie as well. So, it's not just, the Steve Martin, John Candy show. Sure, they do have to carry the heavy cargo in this movie, but they're not in it alone. So, with a couple of days away from Thanksgiving, stiff-jawed marketing executive Neil Page is hopping a taxi to go to LaGuardia Airport and fly to O'Hare to spend some time with his family, only to be bitten with bad luck when Del Griffith steals his ride instead. They end up running into each other at LaGuardia, but unfortunately the flight to Chicago has been sidelined due to bad weather. Page confronts Griffith when they finally board a plane. Page gets demoted from his first class seat and is forced to sit next to Griffith, whom he still has a bone to pick with him. The plane ends up getting sidetracked and winds up in Wichita, Kansas, but however, Griffith, who has some connections due to the success of his shower curtain ring business, manages to find them a frugal hotel with one room and one bed. And this was the starting of a 2-day trip to hell for Mr. Page, as he yells at Mr. Griffith for being a snoring, smoking despot with a horrible foot stench and equally cheesy jokes. And now, come on now, his jokes couldn't be that bad, now could they? Well, let's just say that an insurance seminar would be more entertaining than another one of Griffith's boring anecdotes. At this point, Griffith feels hurt, but he doesn't really take it personally. All he wanted to do was make light of a temporary setback, only he blew it by going way overboard. And that's actually quite natural. I mean, sure, I know both of them didn't want to wind up in Wichita, Kansas. Now, not to say there's anything wrong with Wichita, Kansas, but that's not where they live. That's not where they're from. They wanted to go home to Chicago. But because of the bad weather in Chicago, they had to sort of settle in Wichita to spend a night there until they can find their ways back home. So then they have to, travel through many means of transportation, like trains, automobiles, buses, a semi-pickup truck that ends up getting burst into an inferno. I mean, all of this just so they could get home to Chicago for Thanksgiving. The next morning at Wichita Airport, Page bids farewell to Griffith in hopes that he can finally get back to Chicago. But then these two ironically meet once again and eventually go on a cross-country trip back to Chicago by trains, buses, semi-trailer trucks, and cars. But eventually they wind up in southern Illinois, where they're questioned by a state trooper as to why they are in a car that has both crashed and burned. Pretty memorable scene. And what can I say, the laughs are very plentiful in this movie. And the best scene was when they're in bed together in a rather seductive state, and when they finally awake to their senses, they start going straight talk, like talking about the latest Bears game. Like, hey man, how about them Bears, huh? Yeah, this was truly an exhilarating comedy, but there's more layers to this movie than just the standard comedy. Mostly because Hughes adds more insight to the main characters, and we get a better view of their relationship, and summarized that though they may have contrasting perspectives of life, there's a lot of similarities between the two of them. It's a really fun comedy, but it also has a lot of heart to it. And if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would definitely give this movie a 9. You just gotta see it. And to all my American fans out there, as you all know, Thanksgiving is within 1 month away. Not for me, because, where I'm from, Thanksgiving is every second Monday in October, so mine's is long past. But to my American friends out there, Thanksgiving is just a month away, just about a month away. So, happy Thanksgiving to all my American friends who are listening in. And, you know, this is a good holiday movie to watch. I would recommend it. So I guess this ends my writer review, so thank you all for listening in. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you want to leave a comment, go right ahead. Remember, be kind, be courteous, don't be rude. And I will be back again with another review. So until next time, this is Eric Correct Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.